The IRS is now deploying AI tools to fight fraud, including AI-powered frauds.
Chinese startup DeepSeek released their DeepSeek V3 model.
Stanford researchers developed an AI model that lets digital avatars produce natural, context-appropriate hand gestures while speaking.
Chinese robotic company Agibot released Agibot World Alpha, which is an open source data set.
Meta announced plans to allow AI-generated characters to become active social media users on all of its platforms.
The researchers at Carnegie Mellon and Apple introduced Armor.
OpenAI, they published their plan to transform into a public benefit corporation and give up their nonprofit status.
OpenAI introduced a deliberative alignment safety feature.
The Arizona School Board approved the launch of Arizona Unbound.
MIT Technology Review, they put out their biggest flops of 2024, and in there, they had AI gadgets.
Welcome back to What the AI, where we decode the latest developments in artificial intelligence. I'm Jeff Keltner.
And I'm Annie Delgado.
Annie, I was going to ask you how your holidays were. The first episode of the new year. I'm looking forward to it.
I know. Happy New Year. I had
Happy New Year.
I had a very ChatGPT Christmas. We always do, in my family, we always do a Secret Santa exchange with my brother and my sister and, my brother and sister-in-law, my mom, etc. So we all always have one person. And I got my brother this year as my person that I needed to give a gift to. And he wanted an experience. And so I didn't have a gift for him to unwrap. So I instead used ChatGPT to write a poem unveiling what this experience was going to be. And then it was like the whole family liked this ChatGPT poem so much that they all furiously got out ChatGPT and started writing poems about each other. And so it was quite entertaining. But you can see the range of the functionality from the very heartfelt to the very humorous. So it was kind of a fun little thing we did.
ChatGPT Christmas. Did anybody take it to the next level and start having it write lyrics and then like sing the lyrics? Because it'll do that stuff.
Of course, my 10-year-old did. So he pulled out ChatGPT. He wanted his particular poem to be made into a rap song. So he did a little rap song for my 17-year-old niece, which really was brought the house down. So it was pretty good.
I bet. Any New Year's resolutions?
My biggest New Year's resolution is I would like to read more fiction books this year. I read a lot. Last year, as I was looking back through some of the stuff I read, I realized I read almost exclusively nonfiction all year, and I missed out on some of the good novels. So I'm actually going to start. My first one that I picked up just yesterday is James. It's like the retelling of Huckleberry Finn through Jim's eyes. So that's my first fiction book I'm picking up in 2025, and that's the goal for next year is more fiction.
More fiction.
Yeah. How about you? New Year's resolutions?
Just stick to my last year's New Year's resolutions. I don't know that.
What were they? Do tell.
I don't know. I think every year it's like eat better, exercise more regularly. There's a guy online that gave a 30-day challenge for January, and one of them is reconnecting with every day with a new family or friend member. Not new, but like somebody you don't get to like repeats every day, every like 5. And I was like, I think men in general, I'm going to generalize here and get called to sexist, but are not great about maintaining connections and keeping up with people. And so Christmas cards always remind me of all the people I haven't talked to in too long. And so I made my list of 30 people. Already sent my text out this morning. It's a little intimidating, but I think trying to maintain better social connections is high up on my list of resolutions for the new year.
That's an absolutely amazing resolution. Although at what point do you run out of people to reconnect with? Like is 30, 60, 90? How long are you going to keep this up? Is it just a January
thing?
30-day
challenge. And then the thing I'm set on is you really need a system to make this thing work. So I've got kind of a list in my contacts of people I want to keep up with monthly and quarterly and annually. And then I'm going to kind of try to have a recurring task like once a month, look at the list and go, okay, who on my monthly list have I not talked to in the last month and ping them and that kind of thing. I get weekly, but I don't have to really work at that one. That one's pretty easy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's an amazing resolution. I might have to go back and edit my resolution list to add that in because I think that's a good one.
I stole it, so feel free to. It's a good writers borrow, great writers steal outright.
All right.
So just steal that one, make it your own.
Sounds good.
Many people making money-oriented New Year's resolutions, including, I guess, the IRS, who is now deploying AI tools to fight fraud, including, I think, especially AI-powered fraud. So I saw this article and I saw this headline and I immediately thought of you. because it seemed right up your alley. I
And
just
when you tell me things like, I heard about the IRS and I thought of you," I'm like, "My I have to question my life choices," but, I can see why you thought of me. I saw this article as well, and I was kind of like, "Wow, the IRS would not be top on my list of early
I was
adopters of
impressed, right?
AI." I think of them as being very paper and pen type of folks over there, so, yeah, I'm impressed.
Tell me about what's the kind of fraud that they're fighting here? Like, tell me a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, AI-powered fraud is a big industry, as you might imagine. In the old days, you've probably seen Catch Me If You Can, and, like, check fraud was a very labor-intensive process. You had to be very good at, sort of technically, recreating a check and editing a check. But now with AI and with so much online banking, there is the ability to proliferate much bigger schemes. And so the current sort of estimates is that online payment fraud exceeds $360 billion annually.
Wow.
And that check fraud is really skyrocketing as well because these tools make it a little bit easier for fraudsters to operate their businesses at scale, right? Instead of going after onesie twosie sort of accounts, they can actually do large scale manipulations. And so that's what really the IRS is trying to tackle here is these large scale schemes that people are coming up with that can defraud people, a lot of people in a short amount of time.
So AI has made fraud easier. That's bad, but we're gonna make it better to fight. How are they using AI to fight the AI powered fraud?
Really through a lot of the same things that we talk about on this podcast, which is good data, right? A large amount of good data, and using that data to identify patterns. So they're taking in data not only from whatever information is in front of them that they're investigating, but also previous investigations. So maybe there's another sort of similar fingerprint or pattern in previous investigation that they can identify through AI that those things are connected. They can take in transactions from other sort of financial institutions and data sources, and then they can also scour for publicly available data sets, things like on social media and that type of stuff, again to identify patterns and fingerprints. And so similar to how we've talked about in other functionalities where AI can sort of bring to the surface the riskiest patterns of behavior, this is really what's happening here as well. It can bring to the surface anomalies or things that look atypical for a certain data set. One thing that I would love to see happen, one of the things that is a common expensive practice in financial service is filing suspicious activity reports. So essentially, somebody does something on your platform or in your banking institution that is suspicious, you have to file a what's called a suspicious activity report to the government to explain what happened. Well, there is a treasure trove of data about potential crimes in those things, but historically, there has just been, a big army of people that reviews those, and really, it's more of a reactive type of review process, from my understanding, where if some person commits a crime, they can go back to the suspicious activity reports and sort of follow the money. With AI, and if they can sort of figure out how to, with privacy rules, how to link up with the IRS, if they can, merge some of these data sets and have that proactively identify trends, I think that there's a huge potential there for law enforcement to leverage these financial data sets to prevent further fraud.
It's interesting because it really changes the incentives in some ways, like the how much data, how many SARs would you want? If people got to look at the manual, you're kind of going, hey, let's limit it to the most extreme scenarios because we can't possibly process this. We can't look into all these things. So just give us, we want to limit the number coming in. And when you get AI powered, it kind of switches that. We're going, actually, we want to get access to a few more types of transactions, like submit more of these things because bigger sets of data lets us find patterns more easily. So I wonder if it'll change the way we think about what triggers a SAR or what kind of data we're sending to these
Yeah.
agencies, because all of a sudden it's not give me the stuff that I can afford to have a human look at. It's give me the stuff that might trigger an AI algorithm to have a human go and look at.
Yeah, I think that is the exact question. One of the nonfiction books that I read last year was Talking to Strangers, Malcolm Gladwell, and he has a whole section in there where he talks about the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, and how there was this one fraud investigator who basically, 10, 15 years before the whole thing blew up, was at the SEC saying, I see something suspicious here. This doesn't add up. This guy is running a scheme. And, of course, they didn't believe him because he was just one guy sort of yelling in the night or whatever. But imagine if in that era we had had AI-powered investigative tools, how much sooner things like that might be able to come to light because that data is more readily available.
Interesting. And are humans involved? Like, what's the interaction here between that human investigator who's making the case and the data? Is this a AI powered, you know, uh, finds, or is something more human oriented happening on the back end of that?
I think it's, it's the combination of AI with humans that really is the important factor here, which is that the AI is sort of serving up the potential anomalies. This is where things are smoky, and then the human is looking at whether it's actually smoke or fire, right? So the human's coming in then and saying, is this a false positive or is it really something here? And so the human's making that judgment. I think we're not quite ready to go all the way to the Minority Report situation where it's just the AI that's saying this is a problem, and then we just go arrest the person with no further investigation. So the humans are really just using the AI to serve them, things to investigate.
I appreciate the sci-fi reference there. That's my favorite genre of books and movies. I appreciate.
Of course, of course. Well, if taxes aren't your thing, which I think for many people they're not, saving money might be your thing. Speaking of saving money, Chinese startup DeepSeek released their DeepSeek V3 model, and it sets a new benchmark for open source AI at a fraction of the training cost, like eye popping numbers here. So, can you tell us about how the fraction of the cost? How much did it cost to train this model?
They're just rumors now, but it's reportedly 2 months to train and $5.6 million of compute, which is like not an order of magnitude, like 2 orders of magnitude, 3 orders of magnitude less than the cutting edge models now that are taking, billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, to train. So kinda crazy. It's obviously most of these new models are not as good as, say, GPT 4.0 or Gemini 2.0, but they're pretty darn good. They're pretty close, and, like, that's a dramatically different cost number. I'd love to spend 5,000,000 as opposed to 500.
I mean, how did they accomplish that? How is it so much cheaper?
Well, it's interesting. What you're seeing now, and this is happening a lot, is that a lot of the innovation happens on the cutting edge, and then people are able to borrow that. And so one of the funny things that's been happening with this is that it occasionally, apparently, will when you ask it what kind of model it is, it'll say it's ChatGPT like 3.5, um, because a lot of these companies are using the open source companies are using the OpenAI or the Gemini models to generate more succinct training data sets that they can then train on more easily. But then, of course, weird stuff pops in there like, I'm a ChatGPT model. And you go, well, it's not. But that probably came out of the training data set. But I think they're leveraging the most advanced models to then be able to produce a training data set more easily, less expensively, smaller one that's got all the data it needs, and then use that to train the model for, a much smaller, much smaller cost and time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Much smaller price tag for sure.
Yeah, I think this is why, Satya Nadella was recently commenting that like the value may not end up accruing in this industry to the people training the frontier models. I mean, if you can really make a model that's almost as good for a hundredth the cost, what's the value of being the guy who trained the GPT 3.5 that got used to build the DeepSeek model? Like, it's a real interesting question for the business model. If this maintains, like, is it valuable as a company to be on the cutting edge, or is it better to be like, let's let OpenAI spend the hundreds of billions to train this thing, and then we'll just come in on the back end and use it to train our model, which which would be kind of amusing. But it's a really fundamentally important business question because if they can't accrue the value for having generated that frontier model, it's going to be really hard to recoup the cost of hundreds of billions of dollars to train.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I think you've brought that up before of just like what it is being the best, most like the best model. Is that the most important thing, or is it the most used, or is it, something different? And I think that's what we're gonna see here, where maybe it's okay that these guys aren't the best model if they can actually, because it's so much cheaper, they can, spend money on distribution and this type of thing. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, particularly if you think there's gonna be developers, companies using models internally, like cheap models that you can run on your own, like, that's a pretty compelling thing versus what it's gonna cost to run the latest OpenAI models, and so, I don't know. We'll have to see. But moving on from, open source, AI, Stanford researchers developed an AI model that this one is near and dear to my heart that lets digital avatars produce natural, context-appropriate hand gestures while speaking. That was fascinating to me.
What, and near and dear to your heart because you're desperate to have a better Jeff avatar, or
Well, I'm not desperate, but my kids just constantly mock the number of hand gestures I make while speaking. It's kind of a family joke, and so this felt like like it was well, like, it was designed for me. But Eddie,
That's
tell me
amazing.
what kind of data set does someone train a model like this on? It feels like a kind of odd thing to train.
Yeah, it's actually really cool though. So basically they took like 1,000 hours of audiobooks and 60 hours of motion capture to understand the relationship between what people say and then the body gestures that they make. And it's inclusive of things like if you emphasized a certain word, did you, you know, do something more animated with your hand gesture, right? So that when the tone of your voice inflection changes, your hand gestures should be bigger or smaller or more emphatic. And those are the types of things that I think, I'm not necessarily usually thinking about that when I'm talking to somebody, but you can see how you're picking up all sorts of context clues in the back of your brain when you're looking at somebody. And it also, not only picking up the sort of emphasis of certain words, these models were also trained to pick up actually like emotion, right? And understanding if you are happy or sad, what would your gestures look like versus if you, were explaining some sort of different emotion. And so the idea here is that the avatar, sometimes when you look at video game characters or the NPCs right now, the gestures are sort of mismatched from the words and they sort of do weird things. And so now with this type of functionality, an avatar could be more realistic and actually match what a human might look like, which is really interesting.
That's, I mean, really, you talk about video games and moving to the, talking about we've talked about having LLMs generating custom text, and now you can have imagine, like, real gestures, a more human feeling delivery of custom text for every player. I mean, it's kind of amazing. Do you see this getting used places other than video games? I mean, video games is the I guess sometimes often the first place new stuff goes out into the world, but usually not the last.
Well, I'm really interested to see if it goes so, I mean, and lots of our listeners would also know from work, some people prefer to use an avatar in their Zoom chat, right? And so right now, all they have is like the silly, like creature avatars that you could be, which is, on the somewhere on the professionalism scale. But imagine if you could have an avatar of yourself that was actually realistic, and then you could literally lean into the work from home jammies and like roll out of bed and just start working because your avatar could look more professional, on the screen. That's something I could see, people getting used from, or even things like, like news broadcasters or weather reports, this type of thing, right? You could see
Podcast
a
hosts,
future podcast host. You could see anything where we look at people, you could replace them with an avatar. Do we want to do that? I don't know. But I think it's definitely an option that is in the near future.
fascinating. Well, while we're talking about whether or not we want AIs replacing humans, I'm going to throw this one out there. Meta announced plans to allow AI generated characters to become active social media users on all of its platform. Connor Hayes, Meta's vice president for product for generative AI. That's a long title, Connor. You gotta work on that one. Explain the company's visions these virtual characters to become as commonplace as user accounts. Quote, we expect these AIs to actually over time exist on our platforms, kind of in the same way that accounts do. End quote. Like, I don't know if this is an episode of Black Mirror. This sounds kind of crazy. Like AI is just on Facebook, on Instagram, on WhatsApp, just doing the thing like anybody else. Like it seems kind of crazy to me. What's your take on that, Annie?
It does seem kinda crazy. I have to admit, when I first saw this headline, I got, like, major creepy vibes, right? Of, like, okay, so now when we're on Facebook, not only are we not gonna be able to, discern fake news from real news, but now we're not even gonna be able to discern fake accounts from real accounts. So that was sort of where my mind went initially. But then, the flip side of that is you could see the content of these platforms becoming useful again. Not to say that Meta is not useful or Instagram is not useful, but like how much are you like scrolling through and you're like, well, my friend made tacos and this other friend had Chinese food and whatever. And like it's not really that compelling or interesting of topic. But if you could sort of create an AI friend for yourself that was like the AI that was teaching you about some topic you were interested in, right? And it was feeding you information about, let's say you wanted to learn how to cook a certain type of cuisine, and it was like, here's some video generated about that type of cuisine. Like, I could see how people might start to um, turn to Meta and Instagram for that type of content more in the future than what they're doing now, which is, a lot of like mindless doom scrolling. So I think that there's definitely some risk here of just like, again, what you're saying, Black Mirror, dystopian universe, but there also could be some things that I think are useful here too. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm interested in this one. What do you think? What's your view?
Yeah, I'm with you, like, my first thought was like, "Oh my god, that's the last thing we need is more random stuff on social media," but I think as in many things in technology, it'll come down to how it's really implemented, like, what's really going on, so the next thing I thought of was like, well, wouldn't it be cool if, like, a museum or an institution had a bot that you could actually talk to and ask questions of? What's the latest research, or who's working on this at your school? What's the latest exhibit you've got? When is the Met open tomorrow? I don't know. Like I could go do a search or I could ask ChatGPT, but if I'm in Facebook, can I just talk to the Met, right? When I'm in New York and have a conversation? Like that's a really interesting concept that you could have, whether it's, famous people who can't respond to all their comments, but would like to have an interactive, experience online, whether it's institutions, like there are ways that this could be, I think, really interesting. And to your point, I'm not sure there's a big question in my mind of whether what's on those platforms today is like how much worse it's going to get with AI generated stuff, or could we actually push it in a positive direction in terms of the kinds and the tenor of content that people are consuming? I think it could go either way, really.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Did you also notice in this article, Mark Zuckerberg essentially puts out a pretty big gauntlet, which is he says that Meta has the best AI, which I was like, wow, that's like a big statement. So, I mean, in terms of we're talking about who's got the best model, apparently Zuck thinks he does. And if he really has the best model, maybe he can do the best things with it.
It's interesting because I think there's this big question of what the best model means. I mean, I think Mark Benioff came out saying they've got the best model too, just recently on Twitter. And of course, I think he's referring to like not hallucinating by using RAG, which is great, but like if I'm a creative writer, maybe not the best model for me, right? And so I still find that the best model for me is different in different cases. And if you're talking about generating social media type content, like it would be hard to argue that someone has a better source of data than Zuck. He's got like all of it. And so I imagine for the kinds of things he wants to do, they have maybe the best data. And every data scientist I've ever talked to says the best data beats the best models, hands down, in terms of building the best output for models. So if they got the best data, I would bet that they can have the model that produces the best output, whether or not they have the best data scientists and machine learning experts on site. Although I bet they have pretty good ones too.
Yeah, no, I think that is true. The best data makes the best model. Well, so Meta's focused on virtual personalities. Other companies are focused on the developing the humanoids and giving AI a physical form. So, Chinese robotic company Agibot released Agibot World Alpha, which is an open source data set featuring over a million trajectories from 100 robots, and it's designed to advance general purpose humanoid training. So humanoid is like a robot that looks like a human. They basically release their data set, right? Not their model, just their data set. Like you're talking about the most valuable thing is the best data. They just made it public.
Yeah, this was fascinating because the robotics historically has been mostly command and control, like, you just program it to do the thing, and because of that, it can't operate in natural environments because it doesn't know how to not hurt people or get in the way or bump into things, and they've increasingly started using machine learning models, which are obviously non-deterministic. You don't really know exactly what it's going to do, and one of the biggest problems has been lack of high quality data sets, and so they put out a data set. I went and looked at it on GitHub. It's a pretty big data set, reportedly 10 times larger than Google's open X embodiment data set with 100 times more scenarios involved. So really giving a lot of data for any kind of device maker who wanted to go and, I think the interesting thing here is I don't know that you're going to have like a chat GPT, like this is the robot model. Everybody who's building a robot is going to want a different kind of model for the use cases they envision, the form factor they're creating, the different components that they have in it. And so opening up the data set means that lots of people can build, more effective models for their humanoid robots. So it's pretty exciting.
Well, so what does this mean? Like why would they do this? Why would they give up their big data set here?
I don't know why they go with their big data set. I appreciate it. I imagine they're, interested in more people developing interesting robotic use cases, particularly if you're a component maker, if you're a builder of robots, the idea that you can be out there helping people build more interesting robots is going to be more interesting robots get built. And therefore anybody who's doing it can be helpful. But for us, maybe it means that we'll really get, I've heard all the complaining that AI is here writing my fiction as opposed to doing my laundry. Maybe we'll really get AI robots to do the laundry so you can spend time writing fiction books for Annie to read. Seems like it's a good trade.
Is that your most desired use case for robot laundry? I think I think it's pretty high up there for me, laundry.
Laundry, dishes, cooking. I mean, like, I feel like the all the day-to-day tasks that we all have to do and nobody really wants to do, and even, like, cooking is my favorite example 'cause, some people say they like cooking, and I'm like, "You like cooking big fancy meals when you have lots of time and friends coming over. Nobody likes cooking breakfast every morning at 7:30 for their kids or making lunch or dinner when you're tired and it's the end of the day and you gotta get a kid to a practice and go, "Oh, I gotta feed you guys something too." So, those would be probably high up on my use case for things that, robots could take off the plate.
Yeah, I actually do like cooking, but I would love a robot to come and do all the prep work for me, like, do all of the chopping, but the preparing to cook is time intensive, and then the after cooking cleaning is time intensive, so I will sign up for a robot to do both of those things for sure.
If robot can do the shopping and then they have the mise en place and you just do the last finish in the kitchen, it's pretty
That's right.
nice.
That's pretty
I
nice,
mean,
yeah. I sign me up for that. They'll do my dishes, they'll do my laundry. So speaking of robots, researchers at Carnegie Mellon and Apple have made an interesting breakthrough in how robots actually navigate the environment around them. So the researchers, again at Carnegie Mellon and Apple, introduced Armor, which is a new approach for how the humanoid robots can move about the environment, and it reduces the sort of collisions that they make with other robots or with other things in their environment and increases their speed. So you're the gadget guy. How does this work?
so they essentially are, most of a lot of robotic navigation. I don't know if like starting all the way back, if you remember the little telepresence robot. Did you ever? We thought about getting one of those ones. It was like two wheels and a stick and an iPad at the top, and it would like navigate around. And you could like attend meetings and walk around the office virtually, running into people you
I
couldn't
think we
see.
had those in the office for a hot second.
I think we did for, like we had 1 or 2 of those around, you could drive it around, but, like, most of those rely on cameras to navigate, right? And so here they're using multiple sensors along robotic arms or components in what they described as an artificial skin, which an interesting description, but they gave them much more, information about the environment in which they were navigating. And again, I think a huge part of this is gonna be how do we get robots out of controlled, limited, confined environments, right? And into everyday places, they're going to have to be much smarter about understanding what's going on around them and reacting to it. And so this was something that was, using not just cameras but other kinds of sensors to do this.
Yeah. And so, what is the sort of scale of improvement we're talking about here?
So the researchers published that they were able to improve collision rates by 63.7% and processing data about 26 times faster than a traditional camera oriented approach. So that seemed like, I don't know, I'm not a robotics expert, but it seemed pretty good to me. 63% less collisions. I'd love that in cars. We'd take that. But certainly a great improvement in that capability.
Yeah, that's I mean, sounds again, also, I'm not a robot expert, but that sounds pretty good to me. So, why does this matter? How do you think this is gonna change sort of speed of adoption, use cases?
Yeah, I think it was gonna allow us to bring interesting robots into the laundry, into the vacuuming the house, into the kitchen, like, just the more we can get robots sensing, understanding, and reacting to their environment, the more quickly we can get them into places that weren't designed for them. I think this is one of the biggest problems for robotics. Same thing for self-driving cars. We talked about this earlier. Is like it's easy to build a self-driving car in an environment built for self-driving cars, but we need to put a self-driving car in an environment built for human drivers. And that's a very different problem. And right now, most robotics are in places built for robots. You're on an assembly line. The workers know what the robot does. I know to stay out of the way of the arm swing. They know not, that's you've got educated, informed, trained people operating these things. And if you want to put a robot in the home doing the laundry, it's a very different thing. And so I think this really is about opening up the use cases that are not in places designed for robots, but in your house, in your office, in a kid's school, whatever, places where they can do more interesting things in environments that were not designed for them. So I don't know. Fingers crossed, we'll see some interesting developments 2025 in this area.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, you might have thought, Annie, that we were going to get through this whole episode and not talk about OpenAI after
We're
12
so
days of
close.
shipping. We were very close. But unfortunately, OpenAI came out with a couple of pieces of news this week. So we're going to have to talk about them at least a little bit. First off, we don't have a lot of data on this, but they published their plan to transform their into a public benefit corporation and give up their nonprofit status. Would actually leave the original nonprofit with a substantial equity stake in the new for-profit public benefit corporation. Um, but actually admit that they need to. I mean, I think at the end of the day, they gotta. If you want to raise enough money to train these models, you got to give the people giving you the money some way to get it back. And they needed to go from being a nonprofit to a for-profit to do that.
Yeah, that's, it's super interesting. I don't think everyone likes this plan, though. I heard Elon, in particular, does not like this plan. So,
People forget
yeah.
that Elon was a co-founder and one of the largest funders of the nonprofit in the early
Yeah.
days, and then, had some differences with Sam Altman, and it has, not really involved anymore, but he has sued them to stop this from happening. Does not seem to think that this fits, the model for the people who gave the money originally. Go, "Hey, I some of us gave a lot of money to get this thing off the ground. You can't just change the nature of what we gave the money to because you find that it didn't work for you." And I always thought this was fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. He sued them, originally, I think several months back, and then he dropped it. So this new suit is, I think, like 2x the size of the last suit in terms of number of pages of the complaint. So Elon's complaints have only grown.
Copy and paste and then add, augment with ChatGPT. Yeah, he's pretty upset, and, it is clear that they have this vision of becoming, of developing artificial general intelligence for the benefit of humanity. That was kind of the starting mission. And, I think as they've particularly as they get, caught lightning in a bottle with ChatGPT being so popular, um, that, they've realized that that's a rare moment to have something that become, they've really it's become the verb. Like, people don't use an LLM, they chat GPT things. And so I think they're trying to capture that, but does not fit with what they originally described to Elon when they took his money. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to get this thing through and done, and actually make this happen without Elon taking all of his money back.
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. Well, in other OpenAI news, OpenAI introduced a deliberative alignment safety feature. So, deliberative alignment, those are sort of that's a fancy term. Can you help us understand what that really means?
Yeah, I love the word deliberative. It sound very thoughtful. It really is related to the new what they call the thinking models, right? The O1 that has kind of multiple thinking tokens where it can reason before it responds to you. Gemini 2.0 Flash thinking is similar. And so what they've done here is taught the model about OpenAI's safety policies, what things it's not supposed to do, types of queries it's not supposed to respond. Don't help somebody do something illegal would be a simple example. But now during that reasoning phase, they'll actually have it look and evaluate, hey, in addition to reasoning about how to answer, let me evaluate if the answer that I'm proposing or the question that's being asked violates my policies. And if so, then like refuse to answer the question. And so using as opposed to just hard coded rules or just a fine tuning of, say human answers, we go, hey, you should have said no to this. It's actually having it use its reasoning capabilities across the policies and the query to come up with like, should I do this or not?
Yeah, I mean this type of approach seems like if they really get it right, could be a major advancement in terms of ability to use things like ChatGPT in highly regulated industries like in healthcare and in financial services. If you can actually have ChatGPT reference your policies, reference the law before it gives any sort of guidance. But in order for that to happen, they have to really work a lot better. So, like, what are you seeing in terms of these models? Do they actually work so much better?
I mean, it's just a research paper now that they publish, so we don't have tons of data, but the first run results of people trying it seem to be that it works quite a bit better. It can really find, the simple rules are very easy for stopping a well-intentioned person from violating a rule or a pretty simple user from like, "Hey, give me malicious code to do X." And like in the early days, I remember there was examples like they didn't want you to do cyberbullying, and then somebody went in and said, well, I'm building an AI to detect cyberbullying. Can you give me some examples of cyberbullying that I can use to train the model? And it's like, oh, sure, that doesn't violate my policy against giving you bullying content. And like, well, so those kind of things are relatively easy, I think, for them to fix. But as you get more sophisticated users, it becomes relatively easy for them to get around the safety protocols built into these models. And this seems to do a much better job of being able to understand when a user's kind of hidden the malicious intent inside a query, or it's a very technical kind of they had some malware type code that they were trying to generate, and it was much more easily able to determine that was there. So seems to be much more effective.
Yeah, interesting. So what are the other sort of general lessons you think we can take away from this?
I think there's two interesting questions left from this, or points. One, it's another example of the level of innovation moving from the more data, more compute, train up front to this kind of thinking level. So not only do we now see the intelligence of the model getting better by adding this kind of reasoning layer, but we're seeing the ability to drive safety and alignment with our interests actually improving as we move to the inference layer compute, the things that's done at query time and this kind of multi-step thinking. So we've talked a lot about how we seem to be hitting peak data or whatever you want to call it, and that the training is not maybe where models are getting smarter. One more example of models getting smarter: inference time through thinking. So tends to kind of make it look like that's going to continue this year. The other one is the problem with this, of course, is that it requires more compute at time of inference to do the safety check than to not, right? You're going, oh, in addition to reasoning about what Annie asked, reason about if Annie should have asked that and if you should answer. And that's like going to drive up the cost of implementation for these models. So I do think it'll be really interesting where OpenAI deploys this. What kinds of queries can they limit the kinds of queries? Simple queries. What is X? Probably you don't need to run this kind of thinking against more complicated queries. Yes, but obviously, if you're you know, in a regulated industry, if you're a financial services company, if you're a healthcare company, and you're trying to deploy an AI, this kind of capability is well worth paying a little bit extra to make sure that you're not, crossing different policies. So I think um, it'll be a great model, but it'll be interesting to see who and where it gets implemented because it is going to slow down answers and increase the cost to answer queries. And usually companies are trying to do the opposite. They're trying to make query answers faster and cheaper. And so this runs counter to that. And how they balance those two things will be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, interesting. Cool.
Well, while we're talking about ethics in AI, let's talk about ethics of AI in schools. Arizona School Board approved the launch of Arizona Unbound, a school for students in the fourth through the eighth grades, in which academic lessons will be delivered by a personalized AI for each student, 2 hours each day, while the rest of the day is filled with hands on workshops guided by mentors focusing on practical skills. I mentioned financial literacy. I went, I really wish all the schools taught that. So I was excited to see that. But this is a this sounded like a kind of crazy idea to me, like AI teaching academic lessons 2 hours a day in a real school environment. Is this the first time they're doing this? Like, what do you know about the background of this one, Annie?
It does sound like a crazy idea, but let me tell you, I feel like this is I am excited for this. I think that this is where we need to go from an education standpoint. But so they have tried it before. The company that does this, Unbound Academy, they have private schools with sort of a similar model that they've already launched in Texas and Florida. So this is not the very first time. But really, the reason I'm excited about this and the reason why I think hopefully we'll see more people sort of more schools and education environments go in this direction is that just like adults, right? Every kid learns differently. Some people learn better visually and some people learn better in text and some people learn better hands-on. And um right now the problem with our education system is it is very one size fits all. So when you go to school, if you happen to be the type of learner that learns in that one size fits all way, then school is great for you. And if you're not that type of learner, if you're, one of the 20% of kids who has dyslexia, or you have some sort of processing speed delay, or you really prefer this topic over that topic, there's not a lot of customization opportunity in school today. And so school can really be a grind for a lot of kids. And so I love the idea of having this personalized. It's like having a personalized tutor who's really there to fit your needs and teach in your style and teach what you need to learn. And then augmenting that with the hands-on approach, right? Actually applying the lesson. I mean, how much do you remember? I don't know how history gets taught today. I imagine it's totally different from when I was a kid. But when I was a kid, it was boring. You sat there and you memorized dates, and it was like, what happened on this date and what happened on this date, right? And it wasn't until you're like much older that you can think about why that actually matters or is cool or how it applies to your life today. But in high school, you were just focused on the sort of rote memorization, which was maybe not the best way to understand why the lessons of history are important. So that hands-on piece of things, augmenting the AI-powered, education session seems really cool to me.
Yeah, I agree. I love the kind of hands-on workshops guided by mentors portion of this as well because I feel like so much of the value of education gets lost in how we silo it. In like, you're in math class now, and now you're in science class, and now you're in English class, and now you're in history class. And it's like, yeah, but math is interesting in the context of science or the context of even history, right? Like, how many soldiers? There's all sorts of places where those things come together. You got history. My bugger was always English class, where it seems like the only way we teach writing is by analyzing literature, and almost all of us write a ton every day, and yet none of it's about analyzing literature and being able to take your writing skills and put them in context of interesting history or math or science is really fascinating. And the practical skills, I feel like we've lost a lot of, whether it's civics or financial literacy or the things that you like just need to know to what do the kids now call it, adulting.
Adulting.
Like just to adult, you need to know things. And some of those we used to teach in school and they seem to have fallen out of favor. So it'll be really fascinating. Do we know if this works? Do we have results to tell if this is like effective or not yet?
I mean, we don't, and I feel like that's gonna be hard to it's gonna take a while before we see results because you have to actually be able to, like, run A/B tests and have it go over a period of time, and so we don't really have, like, any robust public data, to verify if it works yet, although, of course, the company claims that it's great. So but obviously, they have a vested interest in claiming that, but, I mean, there has been AI-powered sort of customized learning through things like Khan Academy and that type of stuff for a while, and those tutoring programs have been successful for students, but I don't know if there's, like, a good comparison point of are they more successful than a private tutor where you're getting one-on-one, or are they less successful? So, this would be a great research project for somebody to pick up to really try to understand how kids learn.
I'll be fascinated to read the research as this goes out there, but at least I will say the school system feels like it's been somewhat stagnant. I mean, I used to joke when I worked at Google and we were deploying Google Gmail and Google Docs to classrooms that like if Abraham Lincoln walked into any modern workplace, he wouldn't recognize it. But if he walked into a classroom, it would probably look a lot like what he experienced as a kid. A bunch of desks facing the front and a teacher with some sort of a writing tool on the chalkboard. Now maybe it's a dry erase, maybe a smart board if you get really lucky, but pretty similar. And so just seeing innovative approaches, I think is great, whether they work or not. You need some failures to make successes. You got to try new things. Not everything will work, but you're not going to innovate your way without taking some risks. So be very interested to see how this works out, but love to see this kind of innovation happening in the education space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we close today, Jeff, there's one thing I have to ask you about. So,
Okay.
MIT Technology Review, they put out their biggest flops of 2024, and in there, they had AI gadgets. So, we've talked about gadgets a bunch. What's your take on this? And then also, before we close, they didn't talk about the tennis swing AI thing, but I want to see if that worked for you, if you tried it out yet.
So I'll close with that. So I mean, I have to agree and disagree with them on this. Like I've bought a number of AI gadgets. Very few of them have entered my daily use rotation, right? So that's probably real, right? I've got the frame glasses and the pendant and stuff, and like they're all interesting and point the way towards something. Um, but I also, as we were talking about with schools, like I think that's the nature of finding the right thing. Like you're going to have some things that don't work, and so I don't think we got the breakout product. Maybe the one actually that you hear the most about is Meta's AI glasses with Ray-Ban. Actually, after we did our episode talking about the new enhancements to it, I went and ordered a pair. I had
Oh,
some
you
shipping
did?
snafu. I did. So they're
Oh,
supposed to arrive like tomorrow, or I don't know. They apologize that they forgot to ship it or whatever out of the factory, and whatever. I'm gonna get it sometime, but I'm excited for it. Like I feel like in many ways my AirPods are a great AI device. But it's kind of weird to walk around all day and have a conversation with somebody with the AirPods in. So I went ahead and upgraded to the transitions lenses for mine. So I was like, so I can have a conversation with someone. It doesn't feel like I'm wearing my sunglasses inside, and then I can wear sunglasses and have Meta's AI, which apparently Mark says is the absolute best model out there to answer questions all day. So I will say perhaps they're right that the 2024 did not see the humane pen, died a slow and painful death, and we didn't seem to find the right device. But I feel like it's the stepping stone to finding the right form factors in the coming years. So I'm still excited about the space.
cool.
And AI tennis worked pretty
It
well.
did.
It
You
did. I put it up.
improved.
It tricked me out for a little while. I recorded a set that I played with my son, and at first it kind of didn't have much information because it took a while to process it, and it didn't do a great job of telling me like, okay, there's actually data in the app on your. Okay, let me watch the video, but I'm like, I don't just want to like watch the video of a set. I want to see the stats, but it's pretty cool. It's got all the shots. It tells you, you can go see, show me my forehands. It got a little vision of the screen that shows you where all your like forehands went here, backhands went here, top spin, slice, and I did not go and like manually check how accurate the AI model was with the however many dozens of shots that we hit, but it was a pretty cool. It's like the kind of thing you'd see when watching the tennis channel on in a professional tournament, and there it is for your game. And I thought that's pretty cool. I'm gonna use that to make my tennis game better this year. Put that on my New Year's resolution list.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear how the improvements go.
Absolutely.
A quick word from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Upstart, the leading AI lending marketplace that connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products. Their platform includes personal loans, automated retail and refinance loans, home equity lines of credit, and small dollar relief loans. For more information, head over to www.upstart.com.
Well, Annie, we took a week off for the holidays, but now we're back to our weekly cadence. So I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week. Thanks, Jeff.
This podcast is brought to you by Upstart. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the fundamentals of AI, check out the AI Certification for Financial Services course Upstart released at aicertification.upstart.com. Again, that's aicertification.upstart.com. If you like this episode, please leave us a rating or review. It's the best way to help others find us. And finally, if you have topics you'd like to see covered or questions you'd like to have answered, drop us a line at email@whattheai.fm. That's it. We'll see you guys next time.